In our last video, we talked about the Dark Age of technology, which would end in tragedy and give birth, narratively speaking, to the 40k universe as we understand it today. But the Dark Age of technology was only the second era of history in Warhammer 40k. The first era of Warhammer 40k is referred to as the Age of Terra, and because the focus of 40k is in the far future, the Age of Terra is considered ancient history in the setting. But interestingly enough, that ancient history is our modern times. Hello everyone, I am Inquisitor Vaughn and I make videos deep diving into the lore of the 40k universe. If that's something that you're into, please like and subscribe for more content as it helps the channel grow. In this video, we are going to break the fourth wall just a little bit because we are going to talk about the Age of Terra, the first age of Warhammer 40k. On our agenda for today, we are going to have two primary topics. First, we will talk about the overall timeline of the Age of Terra to try to put into context the vast history of Warhammer 40k. Then we're going to talk about the Emperor of Mankind and his story, which emphasizes the fantasy historical aspect of Warhammer 40k. Let's get into it. The history of Warhammer 40k is divided into four primary eras: the Age of Terra, the Dark Age of technology, the Age of Strife, and the Age of the Imperium. Each of these eras spans thousands of years, with the first being the Age of Terra. The Age of Terra in Warhammer 40k lasted from the 1st millennium to the 15th millennium AD. That AD at the end stands for Anno Domini, the year of our Lord, because even in 40k, recorded history is said to have started with the birth of Jesus, which shifted the narrative in an interesting way that we'll talk about soon. As something of a thought exercise to try to understand how vast the history of 40k is, a century is 100 years, right? And a millennium is 1000 years. We currently exist in the 21st century, which began in 2001 and will end at the beginning of the next century in 2100. Technically speaking, we are in the third millennium of human history, which in the context of 40k means we are currently living in the Age of Terra. The Age of Terra ended in the 15th millennium. The Dark Age of technology ended in the 25th millennium. Warhammer 40k is currently set in the 42nd millennium. We are in the third millennium of a 42 millennium narrative. That is an unimaginably vast amount of time, which is why characters in 40k consider the Age of Terra an age of myth. The Age of Terra is called the Age of Progress because it was that period of time where humanity dominated the earth, built civilizations, and rose into industrial power collectively. The progress that happened during the Age of Terra would lead to the Dark Age of technology. According to the lore of Warhammer 40k, during the Age of Terra's first and second millennium, the nation states arose. For us, this can be considered modern history in the countries that exist now. By the end of the second millennium and early third millennium, we have already developed technology necessary to colonize the Sol system. By the end of the Age of Terra, humanity has already colonized the Moon, Mars, the moons of Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune. One of the biggest sources of our understanding of the Age of Terra comes from what information we have about the lives of those who were there that still exist in Warhammer 40k, the Perpetuals, those with the genetic mutation of immortality. The biggest and most important Perpetual was the figure who would be known as the Emperor of Mankind. So we are going to delve into not only his story, but the story of those who were there with him. According to available information, the Emperor of Mankind was born before the first millennium, as in before recorded history. The Emperor was born in the 8th millennium BC, BC meaning before Christ, or if you're secular, before Common Era. Time before Anno Domini counted down. So the 8th millennium was from 8000 BC to 7001 BC. We're talking Neolithic times. The emperor was born in Anatolia on the banks of the Sakarya River to 2 regular human parents, from whom he inherited the perpetual gene, which made him physically immortal. Though his physical body was the result of regular sexual reproduction, his soul was a different story. 1 year before the emperor was born, the shamans, or the early psychers of Earth, foretold the coming of the Chaos Gods, who didn't exist yet, but would, and they decided to do what they could to try to protect humanity. The solution that they came up with was to collectively exit stage left, to reconvene in the warp, and to collectively enter the body of the figure that would later be known as the Emperor. Technically speaking, the Emperor was born the most powerful Psyker on Earth because he was all of the Psykers prior to him, and had all their powers, abilities, and knowledge. This would also mean that the Emperor was never one person internally, but hundreds, maybe thousands of people, of souls, in one body. As a teenager, the Emperor's father was killed by his uncle, and while preparing the funeral rites for his father, the Emperor had a vision of his father's death, and that vision revealed who murdered his father. So, the Emperor would go up to his uncle and use his psychic powers to stop his uncle's heart, killing him. The Emperor felt nothing doing this, and there's a reason for this that I want to talk about. At this time in history in the 40k universe, there were no Chaos Gods, but the Warp did exist and Chaos Demons existed in the Warp. One such demon was called Dracnian. Dracnian was a demon created from the first act of murder in which one human willingly killed another human. Basically, Dracnian was the demon of murder, and he was older than even the Chaos God Khorne. It said that every life taken by human hand, every word of hatred spoken in the ears of the dying, and every thought of killing another to willingly further one's goals made the demon stronger. The Emperor's father was murdered by his brother, and this act empowered Dracnian. This is probably when the Emperor became aware of the demon's existence, because when the Emperor goes to kill his uncle, he doesn't kill him by hand, he doesn't say anything, and he doesn't feel any emotion while doing it, therefore dodging all the things that would make the killing a murder and thus not empowering Dracnian. This is also likely when Dracnian started to pursue the Emperor, identifying him as the anathema, the enemy of chaos. Dracnian would pursue the Emperor throughout the ages of humanity, and would finally cross paths again during the Horus Heresy. It was after killing his uncle and burying his father that the Emperor realized that humanity needed justice, order, and to be led by someone who would ensure both. The Emperor also determined that that someone was going to be him. He would leave his village in Anatolia and head to Sumer, or ancient Sumeria. From there, the story of the Emperor becomes a little hazy. What we do know is that it's around this time in history, in the time of the first cities, that the Emperor would meet another perpetual named Erda, who had fallen in love with the Emperor, and at the time, the Emperor was called Neoth. They would know each other throughout the ages of 40k, and Erda would become the genetic mother to the Primarchs during the Age of Strife. From here, the lore for the Emperor jumps forward quite a bit, but what available lore does say is that the Emperor would seek out other perpetuals throughout his time on Earth with the goal of elevating humanity as a whole into a new species. During these days, he was described as arrogant, reckless, and impatient in his goals. He often took the role of the most powerful kings, warlords, and overall rulers in history, appearing as a man in some places and a woman in other places. Because he couldn't really die, whenever he did die in front of other people, he would just return in a new form and in a new place, or even in the same place. Because he appeared as the ruler of certain places, it would also mean that he appeared as a child multiple times. And because the parents of such rulers gave birth, it's likely that he assumed the identity of many people throughout history. The Emperor also died many times, but his perpetual nature made it so that he eventually returned. The emperor was so powerful that he could make people see him as they wanted to see him, or he can make them see what he wanted them to see. However, it wasn't all mental trickery. The emperor was such a powerful psyker that his physical form was barely fixed, and he could literally transform himself into different people in different forms. It's impossible to know all the names and identities that the emperor took before and during the Age of Terra, but according to the lore, one of his identities was Alexander the Great. This is ironic because thousands of years later, during the Great Crusade, the emperor would name one of his flagships the Bucephalus, which was the name of Alexander the Great's horse. Another identity that he was known to have had was one who was meek to inherit the earth. The concept of the meek inheriting the earth is biblical. It's part of the message that Jesus taught to his followers. The identity of one who was meek to inherit the earth implies generally that the emperor, for a time, made the decision to not be a ruler or a warlord and simply wander the earth from civilization to civilization as one who was meek, poor, and otherwise a normal person. And if we wanted to lean heavier on the title, we could theorize that this happened around the time that Christianity rose in the setting, which, if you think about it, makes sense. Being a perpetual psyker in antiquity is basically the same thing as being a god, but with the coming of Christianity, those notions flew out the window, and it was dangerous to be perceived as a supernatural being in any way. There is not much information on the emperor further into the early Age of Terra. However, one of the most important mentions of the emperor during that time was the emperor as the 40k version of St. George. According to a perpetual that the emperor created to guard the labyrinth of the dragon of Mars, the creature itself remembers fighting a lone warrior in golden armor on Terra at least twice. Once in Libya during the first millennium, and once again as a warrior serving the Emperor Diocletian, also in the first millennium. This warrior, by the heraldry on his banner, a soaring eagle holding a lightning bolt, was the Emperor of mankind. It was during their second encounter that the Emperor subjugated the dragon, wounding its wing and wrapping his banner around it. The story is basically the story of St. George, but the 40k version of it in which St. George is the emperor. While it isn't known if the creature's memory is true or not as a literal event, the story apparently meant a lot to the emperor because artwork depicting the story is seen on the walls of the entrance to the imperial palace, which can be said to confirm its validity. Another reason why the emperor might have went incognito during the Age of Terra was because 3 of the 4 chaos gods would come into existence during various points of Europe's medieval period. Khorne manifested because of the many wars happening at the time. Around this time, politics and magic became primary tools to guide humanity, which birthed Tzeentch, the god of change, and sicknesses and plagues happened frequently, such as the Black Death or the bubonic plague, giving birth to Nurgle, which is why his sign is the 3 boils, because that's what people would develop when they had the plague. The emperor had dealt with demons previously, but these were actual chaos gods, born from the warp because of humanity's emotions and trials, and every century their influence grew. This period of time likely marked a maturing of the emperor, as the purpose of his existence, to be the anathema to fight the chaos gods in defense of humanity, became apparent, especially as their influence grew over humanity. So, as a perpetual and powerful psyker, the emperor was around 8,000 years before the first millennium, and he was definitely around after it. But as stated before, the emperor wasn't the only perpetual. There's a perpetual who is actually older than the emperor. His name is Alanius Pius. Whereas the emperor was born in 8000 BC in Anatolia, Alanius was born in 15,000 BC in Nineveh. The emperor and Alanius would actually meet, and the emperor would have Alanius as his first war master. Their relationship would go sour over a disagreement over what should be done about the 40k version of the Tower of Babel, and Alanius would actually end up stabbing the emperor before abandoning him and allowing the tower to be destroyed. Alanius was an interesting character too, because though he was an immortal that was born in 15,000 BC, He was a religious man who believed in the 40k version of the Catholic faith, called the Catholic faith in 40k. It would actually be Elanius Pius who would defend the Emperor against Horus Lupercal aboard the Vengeful Spirit, which ended with Elanius experiencing a true death because of it. It's through this character that we learn a lot about Terra in regards to the modern timeline, especially after the first millennium. We know that certain historical battles that happened in the real world also happened in 40k. For example, the Napoleonic Wars that ended in 1815 happened in 40k because Elanius fought in that war. World War I and II happened because Elanius fought in the Siege of Verdun. The Gulf War also happened because he fought in that too. So basically, we can conclude that everything up until the year 2000 in real-world history actually took place in Warhammer 40k history, if only slightly different. The Emperor of Mankind wouldn't resurface in 40k history until the Dark Age of Technology, during which he was one of the Men of Gold, guiding humanity on Terra. This gives some weight to the theory that the Emperor went incognito because of the power of the Chaos Gods during the Age of Terra, because the Dark Age of Technology was more of a rational era focused on science and secular progress, and the power of the Chaos Gods waned during that time. The Dark Age might have even empowered the Emperor because it was during the Age of Strife that he would rise to unite humanity under him. The Age of Terra was the age of mythology in Warhammer 40k, and the fact that the Emperor of Mankind lived through it into the Age of the Imperium magnifies the ideas of him as a god in the 40k setting. Knowing the story of the Emperor and salvaging what information we can about the Age of Terra gives context to why the Imperium of Man was shaped how it was. If we track the conquests of the Emperor from Anatolia to ancient Sumeria to East Phoenicia to Libya, it's clear that the Emperor stayed in the Middle East for most of his time as a perpetual early in his life, and the influence of all the history that he lived in that area explains the culturally Middle Eastern and aesthetically pseudo-Roman style of armor and names for his later armies during the Unification Wars, which gives 40k that ancient history feel, especially during the Horus Heresy. The Age of Terra would give way to the Dark Age of Technology. Again, the 40k history aligns with real-world history up until the beginning of the third millennium. For example, the moon landing happened in 1969, and in 40k lore, humanity reaches the moon in 969 M2. From there, humanity would spread slowly across our solar system. It would take us 12,000 years to dominate the solar system before we reached the edge and dreamed of going further. I had a lot of fun with this video. Technically, I should have went over the Age of Terra first, but looking at the next video, which will be on the Age of Strife, I think I made the right decision to go over the Age of Terra after the Dark Age of Technology, because the Age of Strife is basically the Age of Terra 2.0. What do I mean by that? You'll have to see the next video. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video and you haven't done so already, please like and subscribe for more content, and please share this video with your hobby friends as it helps the channel grow and I would appreciate it. Without anything else to say, Inquisitor Vaughn out. Remember, the Emperor protects and the future is successor.